Most websites are the primary window for a company to sell its products or services. However, unlike in physical retail, the shop window often doesn't excite its audience or change as often as it should. So today I'm in conversation with George Beverley, Insights Director at UX research agency Insightful UX. We discuss why website owners should think about the customer journey being baked in early to the development process, rather than concentrating on the look and feel first. George, your LinkedIn account mentions that your career has gone the long way round. Can you tell me what you mean by that?
Sure. Yeah, well, I suppose I started off, I went to art college and studied to be a designer. And then after leaving college, I ended up actually being a copywriter in advertising agencies. And then from being a writer, actually, I realized I wasn't very good at that. And I almost went back to being a designer, art director.
Mm-hmm.
And then so I've gone from designer into advertising. Then I went back into design. And then I went into direct marketing agencies as a creative. So I started to sort of learn a bit about data there. And then I started towards, I suppose in the last 10 years, get my head around the whole digital thing and how that all worked. And I guess the common thread and what I mean by the long way round is that, research and data has kind of followed me right the way through that journey.
Okay.
And so we come almost full circle where, I'm focusing almost entirely looking at the research and the data, and have left the heady days of creativity behind, if you like. So that's sort of the long way round, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
I think it does, but I think, your experience in copywriting and creative does set you up pretty well to marry that with the data that you're using as well. Because I think there's a lot of people that just, especially today, start in the digital environment believing that it's all analytics and don't really know how to string sentences together.
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? And if without revealing my age, which is rude to do so, but I started off life before digital, before the internet. So
Me too.
yeah, exactly. So as you well know, we were forced not to necessarily stare at dashboards and try and work out what they meant, but actually listen and look and talk to and empathize with the customer in order to understand what is it they want, what do they need from this. And those are the nuggets of data, if you like, out in the wild that I took in and started to work into the copy, into the creativity. So I guess, could you say that we were almost not forced into it, but it was really the only option if you wanted to write something that actually resonated with anybody?
So I tend to agree that having those skills are fundamental in website design, because if you can't get across what you want to get across by utilizing words, it becomes much more challenging. And I think there is a lack of that understanding, I suppose is a good word, from younger marketers that copy is as important as the visuals. And one of those fundamentals that I learned from my very first marketing manager was, if you've got a sentence, make it no longer than 9 words. Now I'm hearing and reading sentences which are 25, 30, even 40 words. And you kind of think, you've lost me already before you get to the point. So having a good understanding of copywriting, and with you, the UX or the design element, does put you in good stead. You mentioned in our earlier discussion that you see that websites are often promise a great deal, but end up with unmet user expectations, I think is how you describe it. Why do you feel that's the case?
Well, I think a lot of the time, and I'm speaking purely from experience here. You'll start off a web project with the best of intentions, and normally you'll look at some data and you have some objective questions, and you'll have some things that the business will need from the website, and you have a bunch of stuff that the customers or the users need from the website. And up until a point, usually just after you perhaps put together some wireframes and made a site plan and all that type of stuff, when it gets into the visual design stage, when it gets into that stage where people can start to see it and go, oh, okay, I can see this looks like a website. All of a sudden, the objectivity seems to go out the window. And then the conversation tends to be, well, I'm not sure I like this color, or I don't like this font. I'm not sure about this. So all of the great stuff you've done up until that point almost disappears out the way. And it's a real skill and a job for UX agencies to make sure that you get to that stage and stick to it in the objective way that you covered off the first 2 or 3 phases.
I'd have to say I'm guilty of that. I've done that in the past.
I think everybody does. It's instinctive, isn't it? Because the problem we have that up until that point, it's very abstract.
Yes.
You know, use cases or all the documentation you have up until that point, let's face it, is relatively dry and turgid. But then what happens is we almost go the other way and we start to sort of peck away at the visual design. And what happens is we lose a sense of what's good and bad and what's right or wrong for the customer. And then before you know it, your website has veered off and is now not really doing the job it's supposed to be doing. It's doing a job for you, but not for the customer and not for the business.
Website design is ultimately, to a degree, down to what the person that's, I suppose, owning the website, and I use that phrase because I want to go into that a little bit more depth,
Sure,
actually feels is a good, nice looking website, and that they can be proud of it. Because we all have to answer to our bosses, whoever they might be. Yeah, that looks great. Yes, it does. And the functionality of it gets lost in the wash, especially when you go higher up the tree, when you're first doing a website. The question I'm going to ask, and this is one I think is, you're going to say, well, it depends, but who's ultimately responsible for the look and feel of the website?
I guess the ultimate responsibility is with the UX agency, the UX professional, or if they've got that type of person in-house, they might be called something slightly different, product manager, for example. But I think you need to have someone owning it on behalf of the organization and representing the customers and the users also.
It must be challenging being that UX designer or that UX agency, that you do all this wonderful work, and as you mentioned, they get to, oh, I don't like that color or whatever, and the MD or the CEO says, that website just doesn't do it for me. It must be a real challenge to be able to get those people on board when you don't have access to those people necessarily. I'm thinking larger organizations, to be able to understand what they desire out of it. So it's kind of the schedule of work at the beginning needs to work out, what are you trying to do with the website and what's the, I suppose, the end result of that. And design is something which is nice, but it's not ultimately something that is going to make it perform ultimately better or worse. It will do, I'm sure. But if somebody doesn't like the website or doesn't like the way it functions, and I would say like rather than functions, they generally have the last call, do they not?
Yes, they do. And I think the trick here is to use, what many have called a pre-mortem rather than the post-mortem. Do the pre-mortem. So before you get anywhere near building or speccing it out, I like to have a conversation with everybody, including the boss, and to talk to them and say, look, this is where we are going to fall out.
That's a good start.
And be very, very transparent. This is where the banana skins are, and they're usually around a website's not scoped properly. There's general neglect towards the website content. And then the other banana skin is going to be when we get to visual design. So what will happen is, and I talk like this, I'll say to the CEO, I'll say, you'll ask me, it doesn't quite pop. And I'll then say to you, I don't really understand what that means. And then we'll go round and round in circles. And then what will happen is we'll spend more money whilst we're doing all of this merry dance over here on the left-hand side.
You're listening to the shortened version of this podcast. To listen to the full version, visit your favourite podcast player and search for Web Trends Optimize or The Big Lift.